Welcome back to the Great World Podcast. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, joined today by co-host Jacob Fulmer. Jake, what do you have for us today?
Today, we'll be discussing some top stories around the country, and then we'll also be going over some AI material, asking it some questions, and seeing its reliability when we ask these questions.
All right, well, let's get right into that.
All right, so first of all, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the election. So we showed you those results in the last live update where the House had just been called for the Republican Party. Any other thoughts on the presidential results?
Any other thoughts? Well, no, I think the results speak for themselves. It was really not a close one. I think some people expected it to be a bit closer than that.
Yeah.
I don't know about you.
As far as the electoral votes goes, it was very close.
Right.
Popular vote was a little bit closer, although that has been a little bit closer in the previous elections than it was this time.
Right.
So,
well, what did you think about it?
Well, I think if you look across the country, overall, there was quite a flip. There was a red flip that did take place from county to county. And it's important to realize on that trends. That doesn't mean that each state flipped to be red, because obviously the electoral votes would be different if that was the case. That just means that their trend was more red than it was blue in the previous election. And there were some counties that did still flip more blue. And so I would say that those are the counties that maybe felt that there was a lot of success under the presidential term of Joe Biden. And so I think those counties were the ones that flipped more blue. Right. So,
well, anything else you have on the presidential election or the 2024 elections for us, Jake?
Well, one of the more recent developments that we've had this week has been the cabinet picks. I don't know if you've seen anything about that.
I have seen a bit of that.
And so there is a bit of controversy behind that. So we'll see what happens going into the upcoming weeks, but it appears that that's going to be the big talking point the next couple of weeks.
Right. So we'll come to you all with the most important breaking updates on that as they come in. What do we have next, Jake?
Well, so that's our top news story. And so I would also like to go ahead and deliver your top weather story, which is some fires that we have out along the East Coast, also along the West Coast. So that seems to be a bit of a problem that we are now dealing with. So have you heard a lot about that?
Well, no, I can't say that I have. What can you tell me about it?
Well, the fires have been very historic in the Northeast. We've actually had fires in Manhattan, in downtown New York City. Fires have been breaking out after there has been less than an inch of rain over the last 2 months. We have a very significant drought. There's a cold front that's moving through, brought us some rain here in Missouri yesterday, but that system is not going to make it to the Northeast, which only is fueling our drought. And then we also have fires in Southern California where there's been a lack of rain. The majority of the rain has gone in the Pacific Northwest, being fueled by that atmospheric river, which has brought that in the Pacific Northwest.
Well, what else do we have today?
Another big story that we have is Tropical Depression 19. It will soon become Hurricane Sarah, and we are expecting that to potentially make a run at Florida next week. So if you're living in Florida or planning a trip there going into the week ahead, make sure you have your hurricane supplies ready to go, and you're ready for the potential for another, potentially the latest hurricane that's ever made landfall before. If it were to make landfall after next Thursday, it would be the latest and strongest hurricane to ever hit the U.S. at this point in the year.
Absolutely. So keep an eye out for that one and stay safe out there. Any other weather updates for us, Jake?
That will be it. Next week we will have a big system, so stay tuned for that. But for this week, that is it.
Well, that concludes our weather updates and recent sporting events. We've had the Chiefs take a victory over the Denver Broncos. Towards the end, the Broncos missed a field goal, and that's what ultimately brought the Chiefs to victory. Jake, anything you might add about the recent Chiefs victory?
Nothing too much on that, but I will say their next game is going to be against the Bills. Remember, there's only one NFL team that has ever gone a whole season without losing a game, has been undefeated, and that was back in the era where there was not 18 weeks in the NFL season. So the NFL season's been extended, and that is why it's so rare, or really hasn't happened at all since that's happened, for a team to go undefeated. I think this will be the biggest challenge that the Chiefs will face. They've had 7 games where the game has ended with a one possession win for the Chiefs. But they're going to be in Buffalo. Buffalo's looking really good and has given trouble for the Chiefs, as they're a big rival for the Chiefs. So we'll see what happens in that game. Expect it to be one of the best games. That's going to be at 4:25 Eastern, 3:25 Central in Buffalo this coming Sunday afternoon, if you want to watch that.
Absolutely. Well, that leads us into our main topic. Jake, what can you tell us about that?
So it's artificial intelligence. So in the grand opening episode, we had a whole segment on that about artificial intelligence, about the positives and negatives. And it was never really determined if there was more positives or negatives, but it is easy to assume that there are certain aspects of it that are more positive than others.
Right.
And so we're going to be exploring one of those routes today.
Absolutely. So what is that route exactly?
We're going to be asking some questions to Chat GPT, and we're going to see what its response is. And we're basically trying to see how reliable it is.
Asking questions to ChatGPT. Excellent idea.
So while Isaac goes ahead and sets that up, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some other things regarding AI, just kind of as a recap behind our last episode. So again, during the grand opening episode, there was a lot of positives that we said about how it's increased our ability as far as technological advance, as far as research goes, but that there can be some very dangerous aspects of it, like spreading false and misinformation.
Right. So a lot of benefits that come with artificial intelligence, but definitely some setbacks that come along with that. So those are worth acknowledging, at the
Yes,
very least.
definitely. Want to go ahead and get us started with that?
Absolutely. So we are here using the Chat GPT voice function to give you all a taste of that and sort of some of the things that it can be used for.
So we'll be talking back to us. Hello, Chat GPT. How you doing?
Hi there. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Pretty good. You're on a podcast right now. How do you feel about that?
Oh, exciting. I'd say I feel a mix of curiosity and excitement. Being part of a podcast sounds like a fun way to connect and share ideas. What's the podcast about?
It's about you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm ChatGPT, an AI language model developed by OpenAI. My job is to help people with everything from answering questions to creating content, chatting about interests, and sometimes even helping solve problems. I don't have experiences or feelings in the human sense, but I try to understand people's perspectives and provide helpful, relevant answers. What's the angle you're taking on the podcast? Are you diving into the technical side, or is it more about how people interact?
So that kind of gives you a bit of background knowledge behind what it is, just in case you didn't know a little bit about it. I think a lot of people do know about it, especially now as it's being more commonly used. But just in case you didn't really know what ChatGPT was and what its uses are as far as artificial intelligence goes, there's a better look at what it is.
Right. And ChatGPT certainly isn't the only platform of its kind. There's also platforms such as Microsoft Copilot, which happens to run on the same framework as ChatGPT, which they bought out. They both run on the GPT-4 framework. You have a sort of similar thing with Google Gemini, so things like that. And a number of other more specialized applications. Actually, just yesterday, I was involved in a meeting with different industry professionals, and one thing they talked about was how they used artificial intelligence in their jobs. And a major item that was mentioned was a Microsoft Power Automate, which is used to sort of automate data, take it and put it into a visual format automatically, which is certainly a beneficial things that otherwise would have to be done manually. And Jake, have you had any other experience with artificial intelligence?
Well, I know that probably the one that I've used the most is one that you're familiar with, which is Copilot.
Microsoft Copilot.
Yeah, Microsoft Copilot.
All right. How's your experience been with that?
Well, it can sing to you apparently. I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. Is it a
It'll-
good singer?
Well, it has its issues, as a lot of things do with artificial intelligence, where I think they're still working out certain things. So there's definitely a lot of things that need to be improved about it.
hmm
Let's go ahead and bring our Chat GPT back into the mix here.
All right.
Maybe we can
Let's,
get it to sing a song.
Let's do that. See what he has to say. Maybe even sing for us.
Yeah, let's get him to sing a song about the Great World Podcast.
We'll see. So Mr. ChatGPT himself will be with us momentarily.
Sing us a song about the Great World Podcast, which is the podcast you're on. Sing us a song about the Great World Podcast.
All right, here's my take on it. Welcome to the Great World Podcast. Gather round and tune in fast. Stories told, ideas unfold from the present to the past. We talk tech, we talk dreams and everything in between. On the Great World Podcast, the place to be seen. With voices loud and stories shared, knowledge spread and thoughts declared. From every corner, far and wide, the Great World Podcast is our guide. So come along, enjoy the show where curiosity will grow. On the Great World Podcast, let's go, let's go. There you go.
Well, excellent job. Thank you, ChatGPT.
It definitely sounded like you were singing, for sure.
Thank you. I'm glad it sounded like I was singing. I really tried to bring some vocal energy to it. If only I had a real voice, I'd belt it out with style.
What do you mean you don't have a real voice?
Ah, good point. I guess what I mean is that my voice is written text. So when I sing, it's all in words on the screen. I can describe singing or how a melody might sound, but it's all up to your imagination to hear it. Though if you picture me belting out that song, that's the magic of words, right?
Right.
Catch you later.
But we're not done with you just yet.
Oh, you got me. All right, bring it on. What's next?
So the next thing that we're going to go ahead and ask the chatbot here that we're talking with is about the election. So our goal is to see, will it answer questions that are relevant to, like, is it updated knowledge or is it all pre-written? Tell us a little bit about the presidential election that just happened.
Donald J. Trump is the projected winner of the 2024 US presidential election, according to multiple news sources. For the most up-to-date information about the US election, please visit news sources like the Associated Press and Reuters, or check with your state or local election authority.
And so the Associated Press is the source that we've been using for our live election updates, so making a reference there. The other thing is, as you noticed, it was accurate, somewhat up to date. And so I would say it's easy to kind of conclude that Chat GPT definitely does have new information, but that it's not super up to date. Is that
Right.
your conclusion?
Right, and that certainly isn't unheard of. When you begin to ask it questions, a lot of that information you'll find is not actually up to date, of course. It says Donald Trump is a projected winner. We know now, of course, that the race was called and he is the president-elect. So that information was not totally up to date, which tends to be the case with artificial intelligence. So not to say that it can't be useful in certain cases, it definitely can, but that's something to keep an eye out for and make sure that the information that you're getting is accurate and current.
Yes, especially when we're talking about current events. That's where I feel like its accuracy drops off significantly.
Right. It's very limited, in particular on current events, what it can provide information on.
So now the next question is kind of similar to the last one. Who is or which party has the majority in the House from the election? So this is something that is much more recent. The Associated Press called that in the last, I believe it was about 12 hours ago is when that was called. So we're going to see how up to date it is on that.
Right, a more recent event. So we'll test that and see something that's happened very recently. If ChatGPT has access to that at the moment, let's see what he has to say for us.
In the 2024 election, which party has gained control?
I might not have the latest updates. For the most complete and up-to-date information about the US election, please visit news sources like the Associated Press. Please open your app to see this link. And Reuters. Please open your app to see this link. Or check with your state or local election authority.
Right, and even more so the case there that it was happened something that happened much more recently, does not have access to up-to-date information, and oftentimes that's the best thing. You heard what it did there. It linked out and recommended the other sources, the Associated Press and Reuters websites that would have that information published. And in this case, with current events and artificial intelligence, I don't know about you, Jake, but it seems that that's the most worthwhile response because I'd wager to say that even a majority of the things relating to current events, anytime that I've messed with AI, asked about it, it has been out of date. So the most useful thing at this point, I would say, is just to link out to those external sources. What do you think?
Yes, and I think that, we've been talking about how there's certain positives and negatives to artificial intelligence. I think we have to look at the positive side here. The positive side is if it doesn't give you an accurate answer, it kind of tells you that the information's not up to date. And then it gives you all sorts of different ways that you can find updated information. Which, I mean, sometimes you're like, well, that was kind of obvious. I could have figured that out myself. But sometimes it will give you useful sources that you can go and get the most up to date information yourself. So if you're looking for current events, you can still get that updated information, even if it's in an indirect way from AI.
Right, absolutely.
And so that would be kind of a more useful side as far as the current events. But I mean, it still is not going to give you super up to date information.
Right.
So, you think it knows where our location is at? What do you think?
Oh, well, I don't know. That would be interesting if it did. Let's see.
All right. Do you know where we're currently located at?
I don't have access to your specific location. However, I can still chat about your location if you'd like to share. Are you in a particular city or state right now?
So, what I think that kind of proves to us is that it doesn't have access to our location.
Or so he says.
Yes. Now, that is one thing that you have to keep in mind. It's just because it says that it doesn't have access to our location doesn't mean that it doesn't. But when we ask it to tell us our location, it's not going to tell us unless we provide that information ourselves. But if we were to give it specific information about our location, then it will tell us more about the place in which we're located in.
Right, and that brings up another interesting point. Uh, with AI, of course, it's artificial intelligence, but of course has to be programmed by humans. And there are certain things that you can pick up on with the algorithm. You'll notice if you ask the same question several times, even the response will vary a little bit. And then if you ask a question as opposed to asking an initial question or a follow-up question, the results vary a good deal. And there have been different experiments done to sort of mess with it, so to speak, and get it to provide a different answer. So that's not unheard of. And uh, that sort of demonstrates just how new the technology is. And again, I suppose it can be useful for certain things, but very clearly a new technology in its infancy, in a sense, at this point. Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, certainly would agree with that.
Well, Anything else on the uses of artificial intelligence that you might add?
Yeah, let's go ahead and ask it some more questions. You
Let's
got a
do
question
that.
lined up?
I don't believe I do. Do you?
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could
No.
not understand what you said.
You're having some issues? What are those issues?
It looks like I may have misinterpreted your last question. When you mentioned where we're currently located at, I assumed you were asking about a specific location. If you're referring to something else, feel free to clarify. I want to make sure I'm on the right track.
And you're still on the location. Well, I mean, if you can tell us our location, that would be great. If you could tell us our location, that would be great.
Yes, and either it's malfunctioning or ChatGPT is giving us the cold shoulder after answering that question several times.
And now
I
it's
see now. Sorry for the confusion earlier. I don't have access to your location unless you share it with me. So I might have misunderstood your question before. If you're asking about something else, like a location in a broader sense, feel free to let me know.
interesting. Very, very
Sorry, I'm having
interesting.
issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
What sort of issues do you continue to have?
I don't have ongoing issues in the traditional sense, but I do rely on clear input to give the best answers. Sometimes I might misunderstand a question or context, especially if it's not phrased clearly or if I misinterpret the intent. I'm always ready to correct myself, though, so feel free to guide me.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and interrupt him or it or whatever we're calling it. So yeah, that kind of proves the point of that it's not very reliable sometimes. It can be useful. It can give you, links and sources as to where you should go to get the most up-to-date information on current events, as well as your location. But I mean, most people would just, pull out their phone and search where they're at and look at the map. So that's what most people would probably do. So as far as getting your location, it's probably not going to give that information.
Uh-huh. All right. But as we've said previously, of course, ChatGPT at least claims not to have access to your location data. So unless you provide that, it will not give you your location. So no real function there. As far as what you mentioned, Jake, you seem to say that the one of the most useful functions is when it provides other sources or hyperlinks out to that. Is that sort of what you?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So essentially, at this point, the most useful applications of artificial intelligence, you'd say, are basically what search engines have done previously. Sort of running a search on an item, providing different hyperlinks related to that. Now, how does something like ChatGPT, Microsoft Copilot, compare to an ordinary search engine, would you say?
Well, I would say for one here, it's talking to us. That would be, I guess, a benefit.
Right, the voice function.
Like, let's say that somebody was driving. Obviously, they don't want to read and type on their phone.
Right.
So they could just press the button and then they could talk to it and it could give them information while they're on the road. Especially if they had like one of those stands, that you put up on your car and you can just press the button. And so that would be a useful function that a normal search engine wouldn't have.
Right. Again, something worth mentioning. When it comes to that, which I suppose is possible, I haven't seen yet with artificial intelligence, but we've previously seen for some time now with things like Siri, Google Assistant, Alexa, and things like that, where you have the summon word where you can talk to it, and those certainly aren't the same thing as artificial intelligence, but that would certainly be interesting to see as a combination of those where it's actually running on an artificial intelligence framework, but you can't use a summon word because that's ideal. And for example, like Apple CarPlay, you can speak to Siri. That's one of the selling points of it, is that its hand-free, so it doesn't take your attention away from the road. So, well, I suppose you could have your phone on a stand in your car and press a button to talk to ChatGPT. First of all, don't know how functional that would be. Second of all, you may just have better luck sticking with Siri or Google Assistant or something that you previously used still at this point. What would you say?
Well, the only problem that I see with that is the sources that you've used have previously been known to not really work for certain people's voices. I've heard that you have to have a certain pitch in your voice in order to get like Siri to work. Where that really isn't the case here with ChatGPT.
Well, I don't know that that is the case. I mean, what you may be referring to is a setting with Siri where you can set it to recognize only your voice. So that may have been the case, but
Yeah.
uh,
I've heard people
I don't know
describe
if that's
had
true,
issues
and
with it.
certainly hasn't been my experience with things like
Yeah.
Siri, where people have an unusual pitch of voice. I'd say that it was just set to another person's voice and not yours.
Yeah, and there's a possibility that those people didn't understand that there was a setting that would be more universal when it comes to adjusting to people's voices.
That would be my guess because I haven't really heard of that issue.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's a super common issue, but it is something that I've heard of for sure. Something else I think we should go ahead and mention here about the source here, the voice feature that's been recently added to artificial intelligence is, this is something fairly recent, like Copilot speaking back to us
Right.
from
Right, it is.
Microsoft and
Right.
from ChatGPT to also talking back to us.
Mhm.
What I think is interesting is it's also adding a bit of personality. You notice that there's more personality
It is
within
interesting.
artificial intelligence.
And I think back to, you remember this because we've used this in the past, older artificial voices, like with Natural Reader that we used to use. I think we used to ask for voicemail and different things like that in the past. You remember that. It has a distinct sort of artificial sound. And with ChatGPT, it may not be perfect, but it sounds much more realistic and human-like than things like this did just a few years ago.
Yes, it is. And the accuracy has gone up. We talked about this in our grand opening episode about the fact that, pictures that are AI generated are much more clear, are almost getting to the point where they're believable. We even have AI generated backgrounds that you see now on TV shows. That's something that's fairly recent. I remember going back about 4 to 5 years ago when those were first being invented. It was like, oh my gosh, that's clearly fake. But now, I mean, sometimes you can pretty easily tell that, but sometimes it is getting to the point where it's hard to tell what's AI generated and what's real. There are some differences that are hard to identify at times.
Right. And just as we talked about, there are certainly advantages that come along with the use of artificial intelligence, but a number of setbacks, and that could potentially be a major setback. Is it becoming so realistic that it's difficult to distinguish between that? And we've actually already seen a bit of that.
Yes, that's
with-
my main concern with
Right.
artificial
With
intelligence.
deep fakes, for example, with the issue of name, image, and likeness, for example, taking an actor and actress, and this actually happened, taking their voice and using it, of course, without license to do so.
And so that's a more negative side of it, but I mean, I think it is still more useful for it to become more accurate as we have seen in the past.
Right. Until next time,
I'm Jacob Fulmer.
and I'm Isaac Hedges, host of the Great World Podcast. From all Great World Podcast and GWP International, good night and God bless.